Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome to part 11 on a series where I show you how to build a simple modern habit tracker called consistency. So in the last video, we basically finished building out the backend of our sign-in component. And now we can register and sign in with almost no problems. There are two issues I want to discuss in this video. Number one is, once we are signed in, how do we then validate that this user is actually authenticated in future requests that they send, such as when we're adding goals or creating habits and things like that? And the answer to this is JWTs, and we'll get to those in just a minute. The second thing I want to show you is this issue here, where if we hit register and we go to the sign-in screen, go back to the register screen, these errors are still there. And same thing with the sign-in. So we need to somehow fix this bug. So before we get to generating JWTs and verifying them, let me briefly talk about what they are in the first place. If you already know what a JWT is and what the structure of it is like, go ahead and skip to the next section where I start implementing it. But basically, in 3 sentences, JWT stands for JSON Web Token. It's a string of characters that's generated using a secret key on our server, and this result is called a token. The client can then save this token and use it in future requests to confirm authorization. So in a nutshell, that's all it is. But I want to also tell you a little bit about the structure of what this thing actually looks like. So essentially you have 3 parts: the header, the payload, and the signature of our token. So the header is a JSON that contains information such as the algorithm that's used to encode our token, as well as the type of the token. The payload is another JSON that contains information about whatever entity you're dealing with. In our case, we're going to be storing user information. And the third section is basically a combination of both previous sections. It's going to take the encoded header, the encoded payload, along with some secret key, and using that algorithm, it's going to generate another random string. And here's what a full JWT looks like. We have the first part in red, which is the full encoded header. We have the purple part, which is the encoded payload. And we have the blue part, which is the unique signature that's generated for this JWT. So the reason I'm going through all these things is so that you understand the terminology that I use when I go and implement this. All right, so now that we're all on the same page in terms of what a JWT is and how it's structured, let's go ahead and install the library that we're going to be using to implement it. So we're going to be installing this package in our backend folder. So let's cd into that, paste the command here, which is npm i JSON Web Token, and hit enter. Great. So now we're going to do the first step, which is to generate the JWT on our server. All right, let's jump into VS Code, open up your backend folder, and we're going to create a new file from the root directory called util.js. And we're going to be putting functions that relate to JWT here. So first, let's import JWT from JSON Web Token. And this first function that we're going to make is going to be called getToken. And the parameter it's going to take is user info. So what are we going to do in here? It's actually very simple. To create a JWT, all you have to do is write jwt.sign. And now you can see that it takes a couple different things. First, we need to give it a payload, which is obviously user info. Next, we need to give it a secret or private key. And to store our secret key, we're actually going to create a new file. It's going to be called config.js. And this file is going to store all different types of keys that we're going to be using throughout the backend. So let's simply export default object, and we'll have a constant here called JWT secret. And now when you're in production, you're going to obviously have some encrypted key here that's kind of long. But for the sake of our local application, I'm just going to put something secret like this. Secret. Great. Let's save that. We can close it. And at the top of the util file, we're going to import config from /config. And now here for the secret key, we can write config.jwt secret. And the third thing that we can give this function is an options object. For me, I'm just going to put the expires in field, and I'll put 24 hours. So after 24 hours, whatever token was generated at this time will be expired. And that's all for getToken. So once this function is called, it's going to return a JWT. Now, let's write a function that's going to verify a JWT that's sent from the front end. So we're going to call it getAuthUser, and it's going to take a couple of parameters: the request, the response, and next. So the thing is, we're not going to be explicitly passing these parameters because this function getAuthUser is going to be used as a middleware for a certain route. So let me show you an example. In the user routes file, we had a function called userinfoValidation that comes before the main handler function. All right, these are called middleware functions, and they're called before any of the logic in your main function is run. So similarly, getAuthUser is going to be a middleware for authorizing users before any main logic is done. And the request, response, and the next parameters will automatically be passed to it by Express. So first of all, let's set token equal to request.headers.authorization. All right. And this value is obviously going to be coming from the front end request in the headers field. And it'll look something like this. So here's an example of what this token constant is going to be storing from the front end. It's going to have the keyword bearer, which basically tells our server that the following is a token and not something else like credentials or anything like that. So that's what we're going to be working with. So if there's some value for token, then let's extract only the token part. So let's get rid of this bearer part. So const only token equals token.slice. And we're going to slice from the 7th index, which is right after the bearer keyword, to token.length. Okay, so now we have just a token. And we can call another function from JWT called verify. Verify takes the first thing as a token, so we'll pass only token. The second thing is a secret key again, so we'll give it config.jwt_secret. And what I'm going to give as the third thing is a function. So if this verify function doesn't work, it'll pass the error to this function. If it works, it'll pass the decoded value. So in the body of this function, if there's an error, then we'll do return res.status 401, which means unauthorized. And then we'll send an object with a parameter that says auth error and a message that says invalid token. All right, I hope this is making sense so far. So once this verify function checks our token, this function will be called. It's either going to have an error or it's going to have a decoded value. If there's an error, we'll simply send a 401 with an error object. Otherwise, we'll set request.user equal to decode. Then we can call the next function, which basically just tells Express, all right, go to the next handler function that's in the list for this route, and we will return. So that's what happens if we do have a token. Afterwards, let's put an else. So if there is no token, then we're simply going to return an error. So I'm just going to copy this error line and put it here. And we will say token not found. Okay, let's save it. And let me show you how to actually use these functions now. All right, let's open up the user routes file. And at the top, let's go ahead and import what we just created. So for this file, we actually only need get token. So we'll get that from util. All right. And basically after the user is done registering, we want to return a token along with the registered user's information. So for the registration route, let's change this line a little bit. I want to send an object and we'll take everything that's in new user and we're going to add a new field called token. And for this, we're going to call get token for new user. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's do the similar thing for the sign-in route. So down here, we're returning the user without the password. Let's return an object, take everything that's in the user without password, and we'll add on the token, calling get token along with user without password. Awesome. So now let me sign in and show you what happens. So if I enter my credentials in the application tab of your developer console, you can now see that your user info has a token field. And this is the JWT we're looking for. Now you may be wondering about that other function, getAuthUser. We're going to be using that function in another router that we're going to be writing in the next video, which will be for the goals router. Because for now, all we have for goals is this dummy endpoint. And once we start organizing this into its own file with its own APIs, we'll use this getAuthUser function. But for now, let's check off the main two things that I want to cover for JWT. And let me show you now how to fix that registration sign-in bug that I showed you earlier. All right, so if you want to give it a try and fix it on your own, I recommend doing so. It's just good practice. But basically, here's the problem. So if you go into Redux in your DevTools, you'll see that under this user state, we have errors under register and for sign-in. And these error states are not cleared up once we go back and forth to different routes. So the idea here is once we switch to a different URL, we need to dispatch an action to the store that's going to basically reset the state of register or sign-in. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's open up the user slice file on the front end, because as you know, this is where all the Redux logic for users is happening. So under the reducers for the user slice, we're going to create a new reducer. We'll make one called reset register state, and it's going to be a function that takes a state and returns something. And we're also going to make another one for resetting the sign-in state. So the body of these functions are fairly straightforward. We'll set state.register state equal to initial user state dot register state. So if you look up at initial user state, it's going to set loading to idle, error to null, and current request ID to undefined. In the reset sign-in reducer, we're simply going to say state.sign-in state equal to initial user state dot sign-in state. Now, if you remember, we don't actually need to write any more functions for the action creators because create slice automatically generates action creators for every reducer in the list. So just like we did for logout user, we're simply going to export reset register state and reset sign-in state. And this is coming from user slice.actions. So now that we have our two actions, or action creators rather, let's go into the signin.jsx file and see how we can use it. So basically, once they click this styled link that says register here, we need to dispatch that action creator. So on click, we're going to call a function. It'll be called handle reset state. And let's go ahead and write that above over here. Okay, so all we're simply going to do in this function is dispatch reset sign-in state and put parameters because this is a function. We also need to import this. So at the top, after sign-in user, let's import reset sign-in state. All right, let's save this file and see if the error persists in the sign-in component. So we have some errors. If I go to register and come back, we can see that the errors are cleared up, which means that the Redux state for sign-in was refreshed. Now let's do the similar thing for registering. So let's open up register.jsx. And after this register user, let's import reset register state. And all the way at the bottom where we have the styled link, let's put an onClick. Handle reset state, an arrow function that just dispatches reset register state. Perfect. So now let's have a look at that. We get some errors, but if we switch tabs, the errors are gone. And this is exactly what we're looking for. Awesome. Just a heads up, here's one of the features we're going to be starting to build out in the next videos. So we're going to be able to create new goals, right? Edit goals and delete goals eventually. So if you followed along with me throughout this entire series and you're actually coding this along with me as I go, thank you very much for following along. I hope you guys have found this series valuable so far. And if you have any feedback about how I can improve it, different features you think I should add, or how I can improve the quality of these videos in general, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But yeah, that checks off the last step for this video. Feel free to like and subscribe so that you can follow along with the progress and build out this application with me. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.